Hello, hello, hello. Good morning. It's another beautiful Wednesday morning. Welcome to In Your Element with Ardis and Eric. My name's Eric Stoller, VP of Product Strategy for Element451. As always, joined by my co-host, founder and CEO of Element451, Ardis Kadiu. Ardis, lots of news in higher education this week.
Yes, Eric. Lots of news, and we have quite a few things to go through. Really high-level news and trends, and we'll kind of pick up on some of the threads that we've talked about, in the past few weeks as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, this week's obviously ASU GSV taking place over on the West Coast. And we've also had the Holland IQ Global Education briefing was yesterday. So I think we're going to share some of the highlights from that as well. And just some other news snippets from, of course, Inside Higher Ed. Near and dear to me, of course, being a former writer of that website. But let's kick it off straight away. Ardis, if you want to share your screen, we can take a look at some of the interesting things that are happening in the world of higher education news. This is a big one.
Yeah, this is certainly a big one. It's kind of a continuation of what we talked about the past couple of weeks, where there is a tremendous pressure on student debt. Tremendous pressure on student debt from a lot of colleges to alleviate that for students. They're starting to take federal money that they're being given as part of the relief plan and putting that towards forgiving some of that student debt. However, we talked about it, that it's not enough, and the federal government really needs to kind of step in and do some more in there. So this article kind of discusses that and kind of what it would take and for that student debt to be relieved. It's massive. So
Huge
this
number,
would mean
huge.
Yeah.
Well, by the way, we got some comment love already from LinkedIn. It looks like Linnell Hahn, obviously, head director, dean, grand czar of admissions for Southeast Missouri State University, loves your Red Hawks polo. I think we need more polo
I'm trying
shirts
to represent today Red Hawks. I love this shirt. It's if one of our partners wants to send me some swag as well, I'll definitely wear that on.
Look at
I'll
you,
definitely wear that on the show.
asking for gifts on the show live. Shameless. I note that I don't ask for anything. I'll just order it from your online store. Don't worry. No, I'm kidding. But I think that the student debt, canceling that has been a topic, obviously, in the political sphere in the U.S. for quite some time. Candidates kind of running on that as kind of part of their platform. Senator Elizabeth Warren or people like Bernie Sanders, obviously big players in that conversation. It's a big deal. And I noticed on social media, there were even some people who've been saying things like, hey, we haven't had people paying. Some people have chosen to pay, obviously, on their student loan balance, but it's kind of been temporarily halted. And people were saying, the economy didn't collapse. It's like, yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And Ardis, it's one of those things. It's very polarizing. But either way you slice it, it's going to change the narrative in higher education if the student debt is canceled, or even if it isn't, because it's a huge access and equity issue too.
Yeah, and there is, as we're going to go through the news today, there's this constant thread for what is the modality of education, how our institutions are adopting to a new pressure for delivering credentials and delivering education in a different modality that's kind of more digital, and how can that technology help, and kind of what the trends are to reduce the cost of that as well. So institutions are actually put into a really interesting place where the market wants cheaper, better, more digital offerings. You have the government, which is pushing on them as well and saying, hey, we want workforce development, and we want more access. And institutions are kind of put in the middle, and they need to react to it and essentially provide new programs. They need to change their whole curriculum. They need to change their whole, how they deal with staff and faculty. And so there's a lot that they need to go through. And they've been beaten up by COVID this past year. So, everything is kind of coming together. And we're going to see this trends going forward more and more. And as we talk about kind of this transformation of digital and kind of institutions moving more towards delivering better digital capabilities or having better digital capabilities, Holland IQ has put a really nice, interesting website together called digitalcapability.org. And we're going to talk a little bit more about this as well. But this is an open source capability framework for higher ed. So essentially, you kind of have the 4 dimensions here around demand and discovery, which is around your admissions process and enrollment management. In here, it talks about student recruiting, your marketing, your strategy around program offerings, your learning design, which is all about your content, and then your learner's experience or UX, which talks a lot about the different systems that you're using on campus, and then work-life learning, the workforce type comparison as well. So take a look at this and see how you are, where are the areas that you're missing, or have you even thought about certain of these topics as part of your digital capabilities framework for the whole institution? And of course,
room to improve in certain areas.
Right, not only to improve, but how should you be thinking about your digital capabilities for your institution in a holistic way? Yep. Because everything that's being done is with the idea that it's helping move that institution forward, and it touches a lot of different areas as well. So
100% agree. I mean, this reminds me of, the document reminds me of, there's this organization called JISC, J-I-C, or JISC in the UK, that had a similar digital capabilities framework along with sort of digital transformation stuff. Mm-hmm. And at Holland IQ basically took that and turned it into like the periodic table of, digital awesomeness. And you could take a day literally and navigate through that, because, certain things like onboarding and orientation. I was talking with one of our colleagues at Element this morning around sort of orientation, how students learn new things. There's just a lot there, and that one little square on there, or the well-being and mental health component.
Yep.
How are your digital channels, working to support students right now? When the sort of the research and the news stories right now around sort of students' well-being and mental health is that it's been obviously very challenged by the pandemic, and it's a huge need.
Yeah, exactly. So going through. Kind of continuing on some of the reporting a little bit on some of the findings and some of the global trends that are happening. Of course, we're very technology focused, and we're very honed into the technology trend, EdTech specifically, and EdTech not just being the education, like the management component, right? The CRM and the student engagement, but also the delivery of content and how do you build that content. Mm-hmm. So EdTech, Holland IQ put an EdTech, last year they had something very similar report, but pre-COVID, they had estimated that by 2025, the EdTech market would be about 351 billion globally. Well, they revised that this year, looking and essentially kind of blew up right after COVID with the acceleration that they've seen. So it's accelerating for sure. And what you're looking at here, there's kind of 4 different areas that that you should start thinking about. So short-term surge, long-term transition. So there's been a rough start for a lot of remote learners, right? So normalizing into sustained long-term digital interaction is super, super important. This idea of digital infrastructure catch-up. So a lot of schools are really in their infancy when it comes to that framework, that digital framework that we talked about, and how that kind of propels those students and how they moves them online and towards a digital delivery. So when they talk about it, it's like, well, LMSs, SISs, the cloud, privacy, security, and then most schools are really at the start of their maturity journey here. So, if you don't have if you don't have a CRM, or if you don't have a student engagement platform, if you don't have a cloud, system to manage your SIS, then it becomes, or learning management system, then it becomes really, really difficult to deliver the kind of education that you need. So a lot of schools are in the beginning, and we need to move them forward quite a bit.
It reminds me when institutions started transitioning from having, just huge amounts of servers in IT based on their physical campuses to moving to the cloud, because it was just so much harder to maintain these physical server environments on their campus, the amount of staff and overhead. And I think that the infrastructure piece, if you think about your digital infrastructure, just like you think about all of the infrastructure elements for the physical campus, why would you ever let that be lackluster? And I think one of the points I want to make to this particular section of this report too is the idea of, the pandemic it caught a lot of institutions in a position where they didn't have these structures in place, and they kind of had to triage and get them up and running. And it was kind of, a compilation of things just because they had to get whatever they needed to support students out the door. But now there's no excuse, right? I think we've reached a point where you had to triage, you had kind of emergency digital engagement, or, learning management online, or however you did it. But now the expectation for a lot of students is going to be, this is just normal, hybrid, blended. You better have your technology up there, just like you have your beautiful campus photos that display, amazing facilities. The digital side has to be just as amazing.
Exactly. And most of the time, if the growth of the institution is going to happen towards these hybrid models, and that's where the growth is, right? So as we look at that, one of the things here is that this notion. Actually, I'm going to go back to this chart because it says that this rise of B2C edtech models, there's a lot of pressure from the other side. So technology vendors and kind of companies are coming in, and they're saying, hey, we know how to scale educational delivery, and we know how to do the experience, and we're going to directly to the consumers. And that is really interesting because we now are seeing how that's happening with the edXs of the world, or some of the other Coursera's, for example. These are huge enterprises that are coming in, or even Google providing those offerings. So we're not quite there yet, but it's certainly accelerating quite a bit. So that upskilling, direct outcomes, how like a lot of workforce, individual academies or programs, and we're seeing this with Element as well. Over the past year or so, we've had a number of different kind of programs that are specifically to cybersecurity, for example, and they're processing cybersecurity applications, and they're kind of delivering that. So we're seeing a lot of these pop up. And that trend is going to continue as well. And then, of course, mobile advanced technology like personalized social gamification and AI and the cloud and big data, that's also a big driver here as well, that schools need to get prepared for. So as I move through this, one of the things that you're seeing here is this notion that OPM partnerships are on the rise. And this is, how do you go from an on-site infrastructure that you're set up as an institution to provide on-site programs? How do you move that online? Well, not traditional, but the fastest way to do that is to partner with a online program manager. So you have your 2Us and a few other ones as well, some of the big ones out there. And that number is increasing tremendously. You see the amount of money being spent here, and this is just for
just half of 2020.
Just half of exactly.
I mean, it's unreal. Yeah,
it's unreal, right? So it's just really, really interesting in here. And Holland IQ kind of provides an interesting way of thinking about this on how how you should be thinking about this, right? So the risk averse institutions versus like build versus buy. Like this whole thing is going on internally in a lot of schools, and there's frameworks out there to think about where you want to be and how fast you want to get there. And so essentially what they're saying is that the COVID has accelerated the buy because it's taking way too long for institutions to actually bring their programs online. They need, people to hire and so on and so forth. Marketing,
fast tracking everything. Yeah.
Exactly. So the whole idea of buying is becoming more and more popular now as well. And thinking about that, as we look over here, there's also this rise of what we're calling the micro-credential alternative credentials as well, right? So there's the pressure that is happening from from non-traditional offerings. If you think about the boot camps, the offline, online, 2Us, Lambda School, and then you have, of course, the online non-degree certificates, right? Which we're talking about eCornell, edX, Coursera, and then we're talking about there's a lot of degree and badging programs as well. So that is rising tremendously, Eric.
Yeah.
And
I saw a thing that said something about the golden era of personalized education. If this kind of represents this concept of it's no longer just a 4-year, 18-year-old entering into higher education. The pathways and avenues and entryways for getting into higher education for various things, from small chunks of learning, certificates, non-degree programs, stuff that's connected to your workforce development. It's just expanding at such a rapid clip. And I think the future really is that the learner sits at the center of all of that.
Yeah, exactly. Here's a little interesting graphic here, very, very straightforward, but you think about it, how early childhood, there's a lot of work that's being done there, K through 12. Like this is the kindergarten, pre-K kindergarten, like you have universal UPK in a lot of different areas where it's subsidized by the state, or K through 12. Like we need to do a lot of work in here. Here in the US specifically, but then you have higher education. This is kind of where we're focusing on. But higher education is also moving into workforce. So workforce is kind of the next, the next wave, or the next area where, institutions or companies, government, they really need, and they have a pressure to kind of increase this workforce, accelerate that. And as we saw here, this is truly happening because you have a lot of funding that's coming in. And what's really interesting also is that governments are now starting to bake in some of these micro-credentials as part of their frameworks for allowing credentialing, as basically making, like accepting micro-credentials as part of the preparedness for a particular job. Right. So as that happens, as more legislature is written about it, then the funding comes after that, right? Yep. So now the funding is really what drives a lot of this. Like we know that higher ed institutions, that take a lot of federal funding, and there's the FAFSA applications that you fill in, but if alternative credentials become possible and they're now accepted, then there's going to be a lot of funding that goes towards growing those, and those are really driven by technology as well. So I guess what I'm saying is that institutions have a tough road ahead. They need to be more innovative, and they need to accelerate their digital adoption a lot faster.
Yeah, it's a rapid pace that is not going to slow down.
Exactly. One interesting news that came out as well, and perhaps we'll kind of cap it with that, is this. We've obviously heard of 2U and how they adopted edX, but the model there is that 2U is too expensive, right? So it's like, how do you bring in this OPM model into your institution? There's been a non-traditional. There's been multiple methodologies for how do you bring an online program and how do you launch an online program.
Right.
Obviously, the fastest way is to work with a 2U or with a OPM provider. There's tons of them out there, but that's the most expensive way as well because they're taking a huge cut of it.
It's funny how it's funny how like 2Us become like Kleenex, like it's everyone just refers, but it's expensive. They take a fairly large cut of the tuition monies that come in exchange for setting you up and ramping up your online learning initiatives.
Exactly, and the marketing as well. So what Noodle is saying is that, hey, we're going to lower that price from about 60% or so rev share to maybe 20%, and you can market bring your own students. We don't charge you for it, which is an interesting model as well, right? And also offering the platform to launch it as well. I think they're using the D2L platform, which is the Bright. I forget what the name is.
Brightspace, I believe.
Brightspace as well. Yeah. So already existing technology there, but you can see how these partnerships are forming now on content, technology partners, and new innovative ways of bringing that cost of delivery down as well. The marketing cost, becomes the most expensive part when you think about it, because now you have to attract those students, and the delivery component is going to continuously go down. The marketing is actually going to go higher and higher. So we're in a very interesting place where Element, as a technology provider, which focuses on making marketing more efficient and delivering better experiences so you can recruit better, is trying to lower that marketing cost, that student acquisition cost, right, by better technology. So you can see how a race to the bottom for content and for delivering the courses now raises the cost for marketing, because you only have a certain amount of students out there and a certain amount of market. Of course, that market is going to grow. Holland IQ has another really interesting metric where, by 2050, we need to be ready for another 2 billion learners to pass through.
And they were saying in yesterday's briefing, I don't know how we're going to accommodate that at the moment. Yeah,
exactly. So, physical spaces are not going to do it. Technology is going to be one of the main drivers. However, institutions need to start their digital adoption and digital transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think next we'll have to dedicate a entire news show to OPMs, or it seems like there's a lot of material to cover there. But we've run out of time for this week's news show. That's how it goes. But tune in next Monday for a really special episode of In Your Element with Ardis and Eric. We are debuting a brand new Element451 ad commercial vision. It's phenomenal work. We can't wait to share it with you. And we'll also be discussing our new surveys module and everything that can do. I know Ardis is excited. He's been talking about surveys since forever. Very exciting stuff. So we will see you next week, next Monday, 10:15 in the morning Eastern time. Until then, I'm Eric Stoller.
Ardis Kadiu.
We'll see you then.
See you then.